So, welcome to this meeting of Hampshire Fire and Rescue Authority. First of all, the openness of local government bodies regulation requires me to say that this meeting may be recorded and reported. Anyone who remains at the meeting after this announcement will be deemed to have consented to the broadcast of their image and anything they may say. Now, before we get to the meeting itself, I just want to advise you that just last Friday, I attended the funeral of our former member of the authority, Frank Pearce, who sadly died on the 5th of July. It was, we all knew Frank as Mr. Hailing, and my word was that apparent at his funeral. It was packed with people, and he had a really very splendid send-off. I was there along with the chief officer. Jonathan, you were there also. It was interesting. At funerals, you often hear things that you don't know about somebody, and the most interesting thing for me was that we learnt that he had taken part in the very last combat parachute drop at Suez. It was a very good send-off for Frank. Also, members, this is our first meeting since the Grenville Tower disaster, which occurred actually the day after our previous meeting, didn't it, on the 14th of June. So I think it's appropriate that we should rise and have a minute's silence for all those who've sadly lost their lives. Thank you very much. And before we move on, just with reference to the Grenville Tower situation, which was absolutely devastating fire and a shock to all of us, I think it, as chairman of the authority, I think I should just put on record our appreciation of all that's been happening here in Hampshire by our firefighters. They've been the work has been absolutely must have been exhausting for them, responding to all that they've been doing and going around inspecting all the properties. So I think we need to commend them all, the whole team. And it's not just the firefighters who've been going out doing inspection work, it's also those here at headquarters, the control team who receiving calls from the public. And it's that reassurance message that we've been putting out, and I think we can be confident that our teams here have been really working very hard to do that. So, thank you for that. Now, turning to your agenda, item 1, apologies. I have apologies from Councillor Chad, excuse me, and Councillor Simpson, and the PCC, Michael Lane, has also sent his apologies. I think everybody else is here. Do we have any officer apologies? Or? No, everybody's here.
Yeah. I mean, it is important. I mean, we've tried to sort of work with the Crime and Police Commissioner, and the intention was to have him actually on the Fire Authority. Is there any reason why he's not attending? Because this is a very important meeting which he wanted to be involved in, and we've tried to work with him to try and achieve that. But I suspect the order hasn't come through yet from central government to actually include him within the series, but I'm a little bit dismayed that he's not here.
He was invited. We have spoken to his office. We will impress upon him, and I know he knows the importance of this meeting. I think he has a very busy diary himself, and and we hope that he attends future meetings. But he did send his apologies, and his chief executive, James Payne, did speak to me personally about his disappointment that he wasn't able to attend on this occasion. The combination order is still going through the Home Office, and hopefully that by the autumn we'll have that ability to invite him, or he will be able to take up his seat at the authority if he wishes.
Right, so item 2, declarations of interest. Well, you'll all be familiar with that, members, so if you have anything where you can declare it now, or if anything comes up during the meeting, please declare it at the time. Yes, okay. Can I also welcome returning to us Councillor Hockley. You're very welcome. Councillor Hockley is here replacing Councillor Michael Thierry, who is now on another County Council committee. So I'd like to thank Councillor Thierry for his time that, I know it was only one meeting, but we'll thank him for his commitment to the Fire Authority. So welcome back, Jeff, and we hope you enjoy being with us again. Item 3, members, the minutes of the meeting that was held on the 13th of June. We'll just go through those for accuracy. Page 3, page 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So, any matters arising from those minutes? Yes, I'll deal with that in a minute. Yes, Councillor Mintoff.
Thank you. Matter arising at the bottom of page 5 of the pack. Southampton City Council, we had our full council meeting last week. And just to say that Councillor Hannah Coombs, who was on the authority last year, has been appointed as my deputy should I be unable to attend.
Yes.
Until the combination order is amended, obviously.
Yes, I did have that as a note to inform you about. Yes, Hannah Coombs, who previously was on the authority, is the temporary deputy now for Southampton, and Frank Jonas, who also was previously on the authority, is the temporary deputy for Portsmouth. Luke. Yes.
Thank you, Chairman. Only to say, so far as the members' remuneration committee is concerned, that we have had an initial meeting. We've got to the point where we need to gather further information, which Kevin Greenhouse has been tasked with doing. It has proven difficult to do that so far. So the meeting previously scheduled for this afternoon is now no longer necessary. Kevin, I believe, hopes we might be able to meet in the latter part of August, where we've got the information that we required.
Thank you for that. Members, that is on page 6 under 8D. So thank you for updating us there. I don't think there's anything else there, so you're content with those minutes? Good, thank you. Item 4, deputations. I have none. Item 5, Chairman's announcements. I do have some items to pass on to you. First of all, fire governance options appraisal. My apologies for reading out something quite long here, but it keeps you informed. Members will recall a paper submitted at the last Fire Authority meeting regarding the subject of future fire governance following the implementation of the Police and Crime Act 2017. The legislation sets out potential options for change with the involvement of the Police and Crime Commissioner. The paper updated members on an item of work which the Police and Crime Commissioner for Hampshire had launched to research the options within the Act. a number of police and crime commissioners have already considered the options within their geographic area. Some, like our neighbours in Sussex, have decided to not progress any changes at this time, waiting to see the success of collaboration between police and fire. Others have submitted business cases for changes to the governance of fire, which are being considered through full public consultation. I can report to you that I attended a meeting on 7th of July with the Chief Officer to discuss this research piece of work and to consider the involvement of officer time in this options appraisal. It was concluded that Assistant Chief Officer Stuart Adamson will assist in scoping and quality assurance of the analysis, helping to keep the work guided by our experience in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight in the site of our Blue Light Collaboration Programme. KPMG have been appointed by the Police and Crime Commissioner to collate the findings. The findings will be presented to a project board consisting of myself as your chairman, the leader of the Isle of Wight County Council, and the Police and Crime Commissioner, supported by the Chief Officer and Chief Executives of the respective authorities. Any decision for further action or consideration will be presented to this authority, most likely in early 2018. Our officers will keep the authority informed of progress of this work throughout the year. So we will have an update. Well, I will keep you updated when a further meeting has taken place. Also, national pay negotiations. I've been at 2 meetings. There was an offer made of 1% plus a further 1%, but that was rejected by the FBU. But I don't know whether Jeff can update us, because I'm aware that there was a meeting taking place just yesterday, and I don't know the results of that negotiation. Are you able to give us any update, Jeff?
Yeah, sorry.
I'll just talk about it.
Yeah, the actual offer was 1% above our original expectation, because we had assumed, along with the government's moratorium on pay rises, there would be 1%. So for this year, the employers made an offer of 2% plus a further offer to follow next year of 3%. That is currently out for consultation. As the chairman rightly said, there was a meeting taking place recently. We haven't had any formal response back yet from the employers. Once we have done, we will make sure members are informed, particularly in terms of any further impacts that may have on the authority's budget.
I thought there was a meeting yesterday and we were going to know the results, but we don't know then. Yeah, you carry on.
Yeah, sorry. There was a national meeting in the Fire Brigade Union yesterday, and just been informed by Alex that we are monitoring the outcomes of that. There's been no response, so the employers have made the offer. The employees, the Fire Brigade Union, particularly in this case, representative bodies, considered that offer yesterday, and we're waiting to hear the outcome of that discussions only yesterday. So that's a reflection of where Jeff has indicated. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, if I can fill in a little bit, is that the employers were supposed to be meeting tomorrow, but that's now been put off to some date in August. I also understand the FBU, rather than doing a ballot of its members, was a survey of the areas rather than an individual ballot. I stand to be corrected on that. And there was a sounding board that the FBU had put out to its representatives rather than a proper ballot.
My understanding was that there had to be, this whole issue had to be resolved by the end of July, so clearly it's not going to be, is it? So we'll have to await developments. Still with my announcements. The Home Secretary, Anne Rudd, has recently announced that HMIC will, in addition to police, be inspecting fire and rescue services across England. HMIC will change its name to reflect this new responsibility. to Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services. So it will become HMIC-FRS.
We love an acronym. Don't we?
Yes. So all 45 fire and rescue services will be inspected over a 2-year period. And we obviously wait to know when that will be. And I think as soon as we're able to, we will have an awareness session just to acquaint ourselves as to exactly what will be involved with that process.
National League.
Right, okay, yes, thank you for that. Jeff, you can update us a bit further.
Yeah, one of the advantages of being involved in national work is that we get the ability to influence and be informed earlier than others. As you're probably aware, the new National Fire Chiefs Council has a number of committees, one of which is the Sector Improvement and Assurance Committee, which is the one that I chair. Within that, the responsibility for liaison with government over future inspections sits there. As a result, there is a reference group which I sit on, along with a number of other key stakeholders. As a result of the announcement last week, a meeting has been arranged for the reference group on the 9th of August, which I will be attending, and once we've had that meeting, I will be able to inform you of the progress. It is expected that all fire and rescue services will be inspected within a 2-year time frame. That will then give central government an overall picture of the state of all fire and rescue services against a set of assessment criteria, which will look at efficiency, effectiveness and leadership. Once we have the detail of that, we will be able to share that with the authority so that we can ensure that this service and the authority is best placed to meet the requirements of any future inspection regime when it arrives.
Thank you, Jeff.
Can I just ask through you of Jeff, is his committee involved in looking at with the Fire Minister the basket of items which are put out to fire services to compare cost prices? Because you can't always in some of the items, and certainly in the last tranche, you couldn't really compare one with another because they're for different uses and different ways and needs of different services.
The simple answer is no, that's no longer in my remit. It used to be in my previous role as a board director. That now sits in with sector resources, but due to other work that we do within my committee, we do have close links to procurement in terms of understanding the pipeline, but not specifically with the basket of goods. There is another report that we're expecting to see very shortly in terms of our performance around the basket of goods, but exactly when that will come out, we're not quite sure.
Chairman, if I may just add, Chairman, I think the National Fire Chiefs Council is indicating to government that we believe that that process, although helpful in broad terms, is a very blunt instrument to look at procurement, and procurement is a very sophisticated thing. We recognise, certainly in Hampshire, the need to collaboratively procure and the efficiencies that can be gained, but the basket of goods exercise itself is quite a blunt instrument. As you say, you may be comparing like for like, and they may be good reasons for them to be procured in the way that they are. Thank you, Chairman.
Sorry, sorry, I thought you were saying. Right, we now move on to item 6 on your agenda, which is member development and comments. I'm sorry, I've got a few things to say here, first of all. Firstly, the LGA annual conference was held very recently. I attended that along with Roger Price, Liz Fairhurst, and officers Neil Odin, Howard Watson, Becky Lee. It was the largest local government event of the year, the first major local government event to take place after the general and local elections, attended by around 1,200 local government leaders, councillors and ministers. The conference was heavily focused on local authority health and housing, and was a good opportunity to better understand the local authority landscape within which the fire service and clearly the authority operates. Also recently I attended the Fire Commission meeting with Roger Price and the Chief Officer here beside me, where we heard from the new Fire Minister, Nick Hurd. He spoke about his experiences at Grenfell Tower, and I think it's fair to say that he found it difficult. What he indicated to us, he found it difficult meeting some of the casualties from Grenfell. He also advised that a draft of the new Fire and Rescue National Framework for England is being prepared, and consultation is expected to be in late autumn. We also had a presentation about the Grenfell fire from Danny Cotton, when there was then a discussion about fire safety implications. Did you have anything you wanted to add about the national framework?
Just for the authorities' understanding, the National Framework document was written about 5 or 6 years ago, probably 6 years ago now, and when you read it, it is quite historic in nature, and I think it is due for a rewrite. It sets the policy framework from our government department now as the Home Office, so it hasn't been rewritten since we've joined the Home Office. It sets the policy framework for fire authorities to operate within. I'm sure we'll see early drafts. We'll make sure that that's presented to the authority through the autumn so you can see and contribute to shaping the National Framework document, and be assured that the National Fire Chiefs Council is playing its part in shaping and helping write actually those early drafts of that document, which is important in terms of setting, as I said, the framework for fire and rescue services across England. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Also, members, on the 12th of July, I attended along with some others of you, the opening of the Police and Fire Heritage Site at Solent Sky Museum. And I must say what a splendid exhibition has been put together by Alan House. I did write to Alan and congratulate him and his team, but I think it is appropriate to put on record here, part of our meeting, how well they've worked there and what an excellent exhibition that there is. Those of you that weren't able to go, Alan has offered a tour around, and we did have a look around, and he's got a meeting room there. So there was some initial discussion about the possibility of having one of our authority meetings down there. So we'll investigate that and clearly let you know in the future if that can happen. But that would be something quite interesting. It would give a different slant to our meetings for sure. Also, on the 4th of August, just to remind you, we have the graduation ceremony taking place here. I'm not sure how many recruits do we have graduating? Are you able to?
27. Yeah, 27.
27. So, yes. Sorry.
And just to say, Chairman, if I may, you know, this is, I think, an important point
Yes.
of Hampshire Fire and Rescue Services history. We haven't recruited for 6 or 7 years, and hopefully you're able to attend. Your attendance will be noted by them and appreciated by them and their families. It is quite a celebration of the training that they've undertaken. Their training is very, very different. Their initial training is very different from what it was 6 or 7 years ago, and reflects the modern role of a firefighter. And I think you'll get a flavour of that from the morning, and family, and you'll get a chance to meet our newest recruits into the service on the whole time side, and also their families as well. So I'd encourage your attendance. Thank you.
So if you can attend on that day, please do so. I can remember being here at the last one, which was 8 years ago. Yes,
8 years.
Eight years ago. Yes, yes. It was when we just joined the authority, wasn't it? Yes. It's the 4th of August. 4th of August.
10 o'clock, is it?
So, yes.
I'd like to recommend that as many people on the board that do go. I've been before a number of years ago, and my wife and I already agreed to turn up on the day to see the training day.
Excellent. Thank you, Jonathan. So it would have been 8 years ago that you came then?
Actually,
No,
it was years ago, actually.
Yes.
We actually bid and won a raffle ticket.
Oh,
We didn't know what was in it until we opened it, and we discovered it was 2 tickets to the Eastleigh training day.
Oh, right. Oh.
There you go. So we came off a meeting.
and you remember the day, so that was an
One or
excellent...
two firemen around here who were rather junior, actually.
Okay. Right. Now, this is member development and comments. Members, I've been sort of talking on a bit there, but I've been to one or two things. So others of you have done things, I'm sure. So over to you for anything you need to tell us, would like to tell us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I start with one of the last items that you mentioned first of all, and that's the Fire Museum. Having been to there, the opening, I have to say I was extremely impressed of what actually Alan has turned around there. It was beyond what I expected to see, to be quite honest. But I think that I agree with you, we need to place on record our thanks to Alan for keeping the service's history alive. Because, you know, things do tend to repeat themselves, but certainly not some of the equipment that was used there or in the museum. But I think that it's important, and again, it's important that we also support him in what he's doing to keep our history alive. You've mentioned the LGA and the Fire Commission, which both you and I were at with others. The only point that I would add additionally to the Fire Commission is that Nick Hurd, the new minister, was open, I felt, for any ideas which we had of any changes in legislation which may be needed in the light of Grenfell. And I think that in that particular situation is that if there are things which the service would like to see, I think we should be jumping in now and getting any of that information up to him sooner rather than later while the iron is hot and he is interested in making any changes which may be necessary. Besides those three, I did get involved in the joint negotiating committee in agreeing the pay deal to the FBU. It is not I have been in the past to some of the meetings, but the representatives from my party, or representative from my party, couldn't attend, and I was actually asked to attend and was involved in the setting of the 2% offer to firefighters with the extra 3% offered to firefighters in April next year, provided the government paid the 3%. That is the important part. The FBU has been saying is that the Local Government Association has not been necessarily recognising the importance of firefighters, but now, and what the LGA through the JNC wanted to do is to put the point forward that they are important. We believe that they do extremely good work, but we need to work with the FBU to go forward to try and persuade government there is a need to pay them a decent wage. So I was involved in that, and I shall be involved tomorrow at the National Pensions Committee meeting. So again, which is a very important issue for the fire service, because I have to say, pensions to me is you pay into a scheme, you get a pension at the end of it. For firefighters, it's not quite as simple as that. There's so many schemes in the interlink between the schemes and the date that you can retire and all the rest of it. It is so complicated, and again, it's not a funded scheme. It comes out of government, and so it's a very involved scheme. And I have to say that I'm finding it quite interesting.
Thank you for that, Roger. Right, so did you...
Yes, just following on perhaps from a lighter note, when I was at the LGA conference, I went to a very good meeting where we had the Director of Public Health for Wigan. Now, I'm not terribly sure where Wigan is, unfortunately, but I do know that working with the fire service, they have brought down the the mortality rates, they've reduced the number of heart attacks on the grounds that it's everyone's business, and they have utilised their fire service in a real positive way to affect outcomes in the community. And if we're looking at fire as a health asset, perhaps someone needs to pay a visit to Wigan and find out exactly what they're doing.
Right, thank you. Sharon.
It's you, Rob, isn't it?
Oh, right, yes, yes, sorry.
Yeah, so on that, actually, we've been talking to Wigan. Yeah, we have about a year and a half ago, actually. So the development of fire as a health asset, locally, regionally, and nationally, it really is a collective way of working, which is why I think we're seeing such good impacts in health, because everyone's got a different story, and we're learning from each other as we go forward on that.
Sharon, you.
Yes, we did have sort of a couple of demonstrations in Southampton of sprinkler systems, which we're having. Well, they're currently being installed in 3 blocks, with a further 3 due to start in the autumn. Councillor Chad did come to one of the ones at Shirley Towers, but just to say that sort of residents, they came along. It was the block wardens who came to the demonstration on the Monday morning in Albion Towers, and then in the afternoon there was a media event, and although not an awful lot of residents turned up to that, there was a lot of feedback from the item on the news that evening, and to say thank you to the Fire and Rescue Service, who have done an awful lot of work in Southampton for the residents of high-rise blocks.
Was this a practical demonstration then?
Yes.
With sprinklers sort of extinguishing a localised fire?
Yeah.
Good, thank you. Anybody else got anything that they wish to bring to the meeting? No? Okay, fine. Thank you for that, members. Right, so now we move on to the substantive part of our agenda today. So item 7, Grenville Tower fire. I do have one small amendment to. Can you turn to page 13, section 15A, where it says a stock of 706 schools. I've got a note here to advise me it's 526. 526 schools and academies. Perhaps you could just make that amendment in your paper, please.
Chairman, if I may, Chairman, just to explain, if I get this right, Rob, the 706 refers to Hampshire, Southampton, Portsmouth as the inclusive. So that's our total number. And the report is written as Hampshire County Council has confirmed, and therefore the 526 relate to the schools under the responsibility of Hampshire County Council. That's where the confusion lies. So
Right.
just to be clear,
That
in
is
terms
an
of the
important clarification then, because that isn't clear to me in this amendment
No,
here. So
okay.
thank you for that. So 706 is still a relevant figure then, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is.
Yes.
For the county of Hampshire,
Yeah.
geographically,
Yes.
rather than
Yes.
geographically.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Right. So now we'll take this report. So you're all on page 11 of your papers, I hope. So Neil, are you? Oh, Rob's presenting this. Thank you.
Okay, so the paper was written and produced to give the Fire Authority an awareness of Hampshire Fire and Rescue Service actions post Grenfell fire. In particular, it covers areas such as our prevention messages around public reassurance, our visits with local authorities and landlords to all high-rise buildings over 18 metres Hampshire-wide, and also our response plans for high-rise fires. So the paper goes through those areas and asks the Fire Authority as a recommendation to note the valuable work HFRS has completed to date on the ongoing practical reassurance of Hampshire residents, identifying and mitigating risks in buildings, and working with the local authorities and landlords to make sure to ensure fire safety compliance. But the paper does note towards the end that it is very important that we remember the people that are living in these tower blocks at this moment in time, and that our approach needs to be targeted, timely, with factual information being given out, so that people do feel reassured and they have the right information, correct information, to reassure themselves and to carry on living in those blocks. And I'm happy to take some questions if there's any questions on the paper.
Roger, you were first one.
Chairman, two questions. One is is there a definition of high rise in the number of, not necessarily in metres or feet or whatever, but in number of floors, is the first question. And the second question is under paragraph 23 on page 14, where we have changed our predetermined attendance, bearing in mind that we have our own control room, which would know of the predetermined, having a joint working relationship with Dorset and Wiltshire, are they aware that our predetermined now is different? And so as to save any confusion, have they also changed the same predetermined as ours?
Okay, I'll start with the second question first, if that's okay. So, in simple answer is yes. So that the system, the vision system and control is intelligent enough to realise that within Hampshire our predetermined attendance is now 8 appliances and that ALP from the 6, as it says in the paper. So yes, absolutely. And interesting, we've been working with fire and rescue services across the region and nationally to sense check our predetermined attendance, but also our inspection or visit regime and our public reassurance to make sure that everyone is consistent. And doing what we can for everyone. So there's an awful lot of conversations going on across the region and nationally to make sure everything's there. But I can reassure you that the control room next door to us would be able to turn out the correct predetermined attendance. On the high-rise question, we had to be working with DCLG guidance on this because it's a different way of us to work. So their guidance to us is a residential building over 18 metres. Now that falls inside the fire safety order and in legislation. If you go with floors could be of different height. So they've gone for the 18 metres and above of a residential nature as the regime that we're going through at this moment in time. Particularly we would look at high rise being 5 or 6 floors, but to get rid of any kind of grey areas, they've gone with the 18 metres above of residential.
Yeah. Rob, can I just ask you, in high-rise buildings where occupiers change their front doors, is there any legislation which can ensure they change them back to appropriate fire doors or fire-resistant doors?
Okay, so there is a number of pieces of legislation that can help, some from the Housing Act to the Fire Safety Order, where residents have changed their front doors, that could be in breach of those areas. So local authorities and landlords doing their fire risk assessment to make sure it's suitable and sufficient should be picking those things up and putting remedies in place. If need be, we also do have powers to ensure that happens also.
Chairman, can I just add to that? I think it's useful for the authority and the public to know that buildings of this nature, high-rise buildings and other buildings, are built with compartments, separate compartments which contain a fire should it break out. And I think as an important public message that we are giving through our reassurance work and our education work, that if you compromise that compartment, that box and that fire safety, then you compromise the safety not just for yourself but also for your neighbours and the residents of that building. And the front door is a way in which that box or that compartment can be compromised. And therefore, if residents are thinking of changing their front door, talk to the fire service, talk to the building owners and the housing authority, because you can get some very smartly designed front doors which are fire safe and protect you, your family and the residents of that building before you act on that. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. All right. Well, my question then. So in Portsmouth, for an example, there are a fair number of high-rise buildings. We've had inspections of those belonging to the council and also to Vivid Homes, which is a housing association. But in terms of some other properties, there's some questions about whether owners are choosing to submit materials for testing and are whether there's quite a high possibility of ACM materials being used and are declining to send that for inspection. What powers does the fire service have in that respect?
Okay, we don't have the powers to ask people to send that cladding off for testing. A letter was sent to local authorities, housing associations and social housing on the 18th of June asking for the cladding, if they believed it to be ACM cladding, particularly ACM cladding, to be sent off, and that guidance letter went out to those people. Since then, we've had NHS health buildings asking for cladding to be tested through their government organisations, as well as education through that. But there's no other documentation to say it has to be sent off at this moment in time, and the fire service do not have those powers under legislation on the outside of the building. So building regulations and Housing Act would be somewhere where that would go.
So we're talking in part about a student building, so the Housing Act doesn't cover that. So we are, from a local authority perspective, unable to do anything because, the building regulations on this, a lot of that is contracted out to approved inspectors. So just to clarify from the perspective of the fire service, therefore, for private sector developments, basically it's a matter for the landowner, a building owner, and not something which either the fire service or in most cases local authority can get involved in.
Thank you. Yeah, to come back and to perhaps to reassure the authority and the public in general, where buildings like that exist and there are concerns, then of course, certainly as fire authority members, but anyone can flag their concerns to us as a service and we will check. If a building, any type of building, we're concerned about it, we have obviously quite extreme powers to stop the use of that building, other than if it's a single private dwelling. So, and we will use those if we have to, but obviously that's a last case or last resort. We'd want to work with building owners to make sure they're safe as we can possibly make them. So in this regard, particularly this building you're referring to, perhaps if we haven't inspected, we will inspect to check and reassure ourselves and you and the community at large that the building's okay.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to go back to the doors. Okay, it strikes me as really odd that if the tenant of a flat wants to change the doors, that they don't, at the moment, obviously, need to get permission from the landlord. It would appear that that actually should be the first thing they should have to do. Secondly, if I was an insurer, I'd be extremely concerned about anybody changing their doors in a flat, especially when they're taking out specialised fire doors, to the extent that the insurance companies out there really need to get their act together and say, look, if people do this, it might make their contents or even their life insurance null and void if they do things like this, because what they're doing is creating a bigger risk, not for the insurance companies, and never putting up the premiums that we've all got to pay. And I imagine that's a signal that maybe we, as a fire authority, could send to the insurers, whatever the main body is, to say this is something that really needs to be looked at. I can assure you that if I lived in a flat and I thought my contents insurance would be null and void, I wouldn't change my door.
I'd agree with you entirely. I'm sure the insurance industry will be looking carefully at this. Rob, did you want to? Neil, anything you want to add? Yeah.
To make a general point, I think it's another angle we can assist people understand their own responsibilities. And often in these places, we and others, and as well as us, have not done a great job over the years of perhaps explaining the details of how those buildings work. Often when tenants move into buildings, they'll have a piece of paper which explains the stay-put policy or some other policy. And I think now's the perfect time to make sure we remind and spend time with those residents to understand how important the front door is, as the Chief alluded to, and indeed how their role in keeping that block safe and in those regards. So I think it's a useful angle and we'll pursue that as well.
Just to add a very brief comment, the Fire Protection Association nationally is a body formed out of the insurance industries, and it has a subgroup called the Risk Authority, which is made up of the insurance companies and funded by the insurance companies, and we're in contact with them. So actually you make a very good point, and we can certainly raise that on behalf of the authority to the Fire Protection Association as a consideration for the future. Thank you.
Yes, I'm just requesting an update on inspection figures for Hampshire for the high rise. How many have been inspected, and when do you expect to have completed the inspections, please?
Today's inspection is 145 that we've inspected. Obviously, the 15 that was identified having ACM cladding on them, we've inspected all 15 of those. That was done a couple of weeks ago. We're still working through the remaining inspections or visits that we're doing jointly with the local authority, if it's owned by a local authority, or the landlord if it's someone different, to help them make sure the building is safe. So their fire risk assessment needs to be suitable and sufficient for that building, and we're there to assist them and give them the reassurance that it is so. So we hope to have the remaining done in the next couple of weeks. We're pushing through in priority of those high-rise buildings.
Thanks, Chairman. From the service point of view, do you see any need for changes within building control or planning? In the sense, if we look at planning, planning committees or planning officers will often put a string of conditions into the planning that, for instance, a garage must be used for garaging a car, not for any other useful purpose. Heights of hedges, all sorts of issues around the planning consent. Is there a need to have some planning consent or condition relating to changes within the building from a fire point of view? Or should that only come through building control? Building control, I don't believe, have the same control over the building in the sense that planning would have, because if planning makes it a condition of that planning condition, then it has to be complied with and it can be enforced, etc. So I just wonder if there's something the service, and if there is, should we as an authority not be supporting the service in going forward? As I said earlier on, the Minister appears to be up for any changes which may be necessary, and highlighting those to him to look for the future. I know probably a lot of changes won't come out until after the inquiry on Grenfell Tower, but I think that there are things we need to be putting them forward now.
This will be part of the inquiry for sure, but I understand what you're saying. Yes, Neil.
Thank you, Chairman. And notwithstanding the outcomes of that inquiry, I think you make an excellent point. Members may be aware, certainly those who've been involved in planning committees and others, that there is a process of consideration of change of use of land, and that's a very early stage of buildings. I think from a fire service point of view, bear in mind we are an enforcing authority also. The earliest we know about a plan or a proposal, the better, because that way we can make sure that any future build is likely to comply with the fire safety order, is likely to give good access for firefighting, is good at it, and also has good water supplies for firefighting. So that becomes a statutory part later on in the building regulations, but often by then it's too late. The building has already been built or priced, and that's the challenge sometimes we have. So whilst we are statutory consultees from the building regulations teams, we are not statutory consultees during the planning phase. And that's something we would have welcomed, albeit I know in some quarters there's some concern about the demand that may place on services. But I think with a risk-based approach to consideration of all planning applications, and definitely for building regulations applications, which we're already consulted statutorily on, I think we're cited earlier, we're able to comment earlier and allow developers, architects and owners to develop a safe, fire-safe as well as useful and financially practical building.
If I may, Chairman, just to add to that, thank you, Neil. I have said for many years nationally that the fire service should be involved earlier in the planning process. Unfortunately, I think some of the stakeholders at that point of the process see the fire service as a barrier to their development, and actually we've matured as an organisation, and we can now assist with the outcomes that the developers and other stakeholders seek from a building that they intend to build in the future, and we can provide good guidance and advice in the development of a building, which could be therefore safer if we were involved in that conversation. If, Chairman, if it is the authority's view to take forward that as a position, then clearly we stand ready as a service to support you in making that point to government or any other national body that would take on that view and promote that as one of the new minister's lines of inquiry for change in legislation. Thank you, Chair.
We'll come back to that in just a moment. Right, Sharon, please.
Just to add on to this, I'm no longer on the planning committee on Southampton City Council. I served on it for 3 years, so I was allowed off for good behaviour. But I mean, there's always a raft of conditions attached to any sort of planning application, especially with major developments. But we have no idea what happens with building control as councillors because it's separated out. And I think putting sort of involving the Fire and Rescue Service early on in a planning application is a very good idea. And I mean, the police usually give feedback on, they are consulted early on. I think the Fire and Rescue Service should be as well.
Yeah, just another related question. So in many urban areas, one of the biggest sources of supply for new flats is conversion of redundant office buildings. So, we've seen in Portsmouth, many other places, quite a few fairly tall office buildings being converted into flats, and that doesn't require planning permission. That is permitted development, they can just do it. Now, that also means that it's, from a planning perspective, it's exempt from various standards. There's no minimum flat size, for example. None of that applies. What does that mean, though, in terms of building control and fire? Because if you were building a new tall building, you would have to have 2 sets of stairs, for example. Now, you don't. If you've got an older building and you're converting it, then presumably nothing actually changes. You don't add the stairs in. So I don't quite understand how that lines up with modern fire standards and which standards you're trying to meet on that, and does that create any issues?
So that we deal with that. I guess my own sense of what will come out of the inquiry is the enormously complicated environment for some of these issues. I think that this is a good example of that. But building regulations would absolutely cover that conversion because it's blind to the planning requirements in that sense. So it would require still the standards for living accommodation to be adopted, irrespective of what the building was before. And the same is true of your own household and a loft conversion. You have to provide the means of escape which is required within the building regulations. The regulations themselves are codes of practice. They're ways of achieving a functional outcome, which is adequate means of escape, gives people time to get out of the building, gives people warning in case of fire, and those sorts of things. So clearly an office use is relatively low risk. A sleeping accommodation is higher risk because people are asleep. So therefore things have to change in how the building is designed. So building regulations would cover it, and obviously being a statutory consultee of building regulations, the fire service would be involved in that. So I'm a bit more comfortable that the standards would be achieved, albeit the aspect we mentioned earlier about the planning, the early sight of these sorts of plans would be lost in that regards because there's no planning application necessary.
Beg your pardon, sorry, I'm not on. I am now. So we'll go back to you, Roger, and just refresh what you were proposing there.
I wasn't really proposing because I was asking the question of the service if there are issues which they see should be changes in the law which the minister can make or through government or whatever, then we should be supporting them at this point to try and get it highlighted. Okay, I accept that most of the things will happen once the full inquiry and the public inquiry is taking place but there are issues, I'm sure, which we're aware of at the moment in the day-to-day work of the service, which would be more beneficial to us if there was a change. And I think if we can put those forward and support the service, I would have thought that's a very good idea. And I think Dave came forward with some ideas there about the planning particularly, and I think we should be supporting him.
Yeah, well, I've said to you all on many occasions that I regard Hampshire as being in the vanguard of reform. We've had a sprinkler policy now for 5 years, and we've been promoting that recently. Well, let's just talk about that and see whether we can come up with a statement.
Could I just add to that? Sorry to throw it back to your authority. I do think it's really important the connection you have with our constituent authorities in these regards, and your influence, many of you, on the planning processes within the constituent authorities, and the influence and the knowledge you have of those processes is really important. So my suggestion is that the proposal made, which I know you've made locally and nationally in the LGA Fire Commission, that there should be a consideration about fire service being a statutory consultee of the planning process. I think it's a very clear, very obvious change which would assist public safety in high-risk buildings. And I suggest that it would be better on this occasion if the authority took some leadership in this area and promoted that, supported by the service, rather than the service supported by the authority. And I suggest that because of your political connection back to the constituent authorities and actually that planning process within those. Thank you, Chairman.
The service would prefer us to take the lead. I'd be very happy to propose that we actually do that and make the representations up through to government.
Just to play devil's advocate on that, so the local authorities on the part of the planning process make a number of consultations, and the consultations are to bodies which could potentially recommend refusing a planning application. It would have to be, any planning application can only be refused because of some policy either in the local plan or in the national planning policy framework. Now, as far as I'm aware, and I stand to be corrected on this, that there is nothing in national policy about the safety of buildings, because that's covered, fire safety of buildings, because that's covered in building regulations, and therefore we would never have a reason to refuse a planning application because of fire safety. So the consultation could come back, we don't like this. We still, as a local planning authority, would have, I believe, no grounds for refusing that. So I understand the information point and about giving the fire service information and creating an opportunity for dialogue, but in terms of planning decisions, it's a separate matter, I think.
So, are you wanting to say something?
Yeah. Can I just say I actually support what Dave says, but in the meantime, while we're perhaps waiting for the law to change, we should be speaking to all our districts and boroughs and suggesting that they invite the fire authority right at the beginning of the planning. It's not just about building regs and how the building is built, it's about ease of access for the fire service to get there in the event of a fire. And all these sorts of things should come before the planning committee, before it gets any further. Now, if we have to wait for it to become enacted in law, I think we're looking at some time down the line, and perhaps we should be putting pressure on our authorities to do it as a voluntary measure earlier.
Can I just come back on that particular point? So I guess on that particular point about the services, I understand it, offers all local authorities in Hampshire the opportunity to be consulted on planning applications. There's a voluntary scheme which we operate, I believe.
Voluntary nature operates in the opposite way, as it were. The planning authority can voluntarily seek a consultation with the fire service. We stand here ready to talk to any partner that's building a significant building within the county and would welcome the dialogue. I would add that I wouldn't like, I think quite rightly, the planning authority has the ultimate decision on that building going forward, but simply the dialogue with us to talk about safety in that building would be really helpful.
Yeah, a couple of points. In answer to what Luke said, in the last 18 months, there was a planning application. It was a centenary quay in Woolston, which is the old Thornycroft site, and there was a representation from the police about a specific design, feature of that planning application that they said they wanted it accepted because it was safer from a crime point of view, rather than not having this particular feature of it. So, if the police are sort of able to be involved in, at an early stage in a planning application, so should the Fire and Rescue Service. Secondly, a while back there was a prohibition notice put on a student hall of residence, actually literally just across the road from St Mary's Fire Station, the result of which was during last year, our head of planning had a meeting with Stu Adamson, who was then sort of the community safety officer, and it means that whenever there is a planning application for purpose-built student accommodation in Southampton, there's quite a lot of that going on, there is a note of memorandum for the developers to talk to the Fire and Rescue Service at a very early stage. So, that is something that already happens in Southampton now. I'm assuming that it happens in sort of the districts and also Portsmouth, the other unitary authority, I'm assuming. I don't know.
Just to come back on Sharon's point about crime, I mean, the National Planning Policy Framework, which is what all planning decisions have to be under, does include crime reduction in it. I think it doesn't include anything about fire safety because the intention is that's covered by building regulations now. I don't disagree that that's something which may need amending, but that's obviously for DCLG to do, and until that happens, we can't, invent our planning policies. We have to follow the legislation.
Sorry, beg your pardon. So you've got a recommendation on page 15 that we note what's happening. We note this report. But what do you feel that you want to add to this then?
Chairman, as a suggestion, maybe as an action from the meeting, just as a suggestion, I could take away an action to work with officers and members outside of the meeting to formulate and look into some of the detail, I think, of the planning process and to articulate it exactly as the change that we're seeking. And then with your agreement, we can probably bring that back to the next authority, agree that formally as an authority position, as a policy, and then we can seek to lobby government and the new police fire minister on that very point, just as a suggested way forward. Yeah.
So what we're talking about there is something to go to all Hampshire authorities then?
That it could include that scope as well as national change of legislation if
Yes.
required, but on a more local, as Councillor Mintoff has indicated, we could also put some actions into place as part of a small plan to seek change earlier than national legislative change as councillor.
I would agree with Dave in the sense that if we actually set up a subcommittee working group, call it what you like, of 2 or 3 members with a couple of senior officers as well, work up what changes there needs from people who are involved in planning and from the service as well. And then we will come forward to the October meeting with a recommendation to be supported to go to whoever it needs to go to, whether it's the fire minister, whether it's other ministers, because the fire minister won't be able to change the planning rules probably, it'd be somebody else, so where it needs to go. that I feel it's so urgent to try and, but in the meantime is sort of the voluntary process that we actually operate, just re-advise authorities that we're there to support them. I mean, what I suppose to some extent brought this to my original intention was that in Fareham at a planning committee meeting we were deciding on a hotel which was being built above a shopping centre, and there was no comments in the report from the fire service, and I asked officers, had the fire service been consulted, and the answer was no. Now I'm sure in building something, and again it comes back to, as Luke said, is utilising old buildings that are there and what have you, is that there may have been some issues which the service might have wanted to raise. I don't know, from a safety point of view. So that highlighted it to me, and that's why I started off on this, you know, trying to get planning to be consulted, the same as a number of other consultees which are in the legislation have to be consulted, and fire seems to be so important to be consulted. May not be, we can stop it being developed, but we can actually try and get the changes into it.
I'm sorry, I keep forgetting to turn on. I beg your pardon. We will get the inquiry results in due course. But if you remember, Roger, we were at the Fire Commission and we both heard the Fire Minister, Nick heard the new Fire Minister, and he actually said to us, send your ideas up to me, send it through. So I take on board entirely what you've been saying, and I think it's an excellent idea. As I said earlier, we pride ourselves on being at the vanguard of reform, so let's get something prepared and we'll send it in. My indication from him is he'll look at anything that we may send in to him, because he's open to ideas at this stage. So yes, we can't agree anything today because there's a lot involved in that. You've got to get the wording right. So we can set up a small group. I think you're content with that. Yeah, I think we can do that. Yes. Okay.
We appoint members to that working group.
Yes, thank you, Kevin. Let's just think about that. How many people do we want?
3 or 4 members, I would suggest, would be adequate.
Do we want double hatters because they understand the planning rules? People are not double hatters.
Well, I'm quite busy, but I am on a district and a county planning committee, so perhaps I should be part of that. And actually, we've got a training meeting this very week at Winchester, haven't we? Are you at that? Yeah, so that will be useful. So who else would want to be part of that? We've got 2 there. Do you want? So we've got Southampton and Portsmouth, and
2 from county.
2 from, and we're both on district planning committees. Yes. Okay. All right. So that's really useful. So can we leave you to?
Yes, we'll capture that and we'll organise
a meeting.
Thank you.
It might have to be during the holiday time. But,
at midnight.
Yes. Right. Returning to the paper then, you've got the recommendation before you on page 15. With the addition. Do you want to have some words put in there? Can
To set up a working committee.
Can you give me a
words around? Sorry, I'll formulate words around setting up a working group consisting of Councillors Carter, Price, Mintoff and Stubbs to review the planning permission position in relation to the Fire and Rescue Authority and Service, for recommendations to be made to the next meeting in October, including maybe taking a view on short-term voluntary options and the insurance element. That's the features I've picked up.
Good. Thank you, Kevin. With that addition, then, are you happy to accept that recommendation?
Agreed.
All agreed? Thank you. Well, can I thank you, all of you, for your contributions. I think that's been a really productive debate about the Grenville Tower situation. And again, I said it earlier on, but I need to say it again to commend our officers and all the exhausting work they're doing. Well done, Rob, and your team for all that you're doing. It's going to go on for a long time, isn't it? Yes. Yes. Right. So we now move on to item 8 on the agenda. Please turn to page 17, which is the 2016-17 outturn report. And Rob Carr has been patiently waiting here to present to us.
Thank you, Chairman. There's quite a lot in this report, so I'll just pick out a few highlights and then I'm happy to take any questions. So looking back at last year, we had an underspend of £2.1 million, mainly as a result of the early delivery of our savings programme, but also due to savings in pension costs, which I think I've previously reported to you. You'll also see in the report that our reserves reduced by £9 million during the year. That's nothing to be concerned about. What it reflects is funding of the capital programme, which we had in reserves in terms of the funding for that, but also the transformation activity that we've been undertaking through service delivery, redesign, etc., which will help us achieve our next round of savings. So it is expected, but even after that, we still have healthy reserves of 31 million, so we're in a good position. Just looking at the current year, you'll see that we have a predicted net underspend of about £500,000. About 700,000 of that is underspends on staffing costs, and then we have what's presented as an overspend on the ICT transformation programme, but actually really I wanted to turn that round and say that actually that's a success story. So effectively, as a result of the changes we've made in IT, we were predicting savings of 800,000 in the year. For good operational reasons, we delayed the implementation of that. So effectively, we've got a variance against that £800,000 saving, but effectively going forward for the rest of the year, we'll be making about 600,000, and then the full year effect of that will come in from next year. So a good effort on that particular programme. So happy to take any questions, Chairman.
Thank you, Rob. Questions, members? No? Right. You're all content with that report. So can I take you to the recommendations then, please, on page 21? You've got 4 recommendations there. Are you all content to take those en bloc? Everybody happy with those?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rob.
Short and sweet.
Right. Now, please turn to page 43, the performance report. This is a very important paper. So this is Nikki to present, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So, performance report comprises 2 appendices you've got there. Firstly, I have to apologise that the papers were printed in black and white, but I've given you coloured copies to refer to. So, in Appendix A, you see our performance indicators, and there are sectioned into 2 sections. We've got core performance indicators that are mainstay, that are outcome focused, that tend not to change over time. And then we go on to the optional measures later on in the report, that are those measures designed to help us identify how we're performing in terms of certain transformational activities and new developments of our service. Like, for example, at the moment, they're focusing on service delivery redesign and fire as a health asset. Bearing in mind, service delivery redesign hasn't actually, it's only in its inception of delivery. So that explains the performance indicators in Appendix A. I'd like to say that performance on the whole is good, especially when compared to family group and national averages. What I'll do is I'll hand over to Sam, just take you through some of the exceptions. Firstly, though, I think he's going to take you through the casualty graph, which is on page 7, just so that you can see the difference in how we're actually producing these graphs now, just so that you can understand them, because it's the first time we produce them like this.
Could you just give us a number of the bundle?
Yes, sorry, yeah. Yeah, sorry, it's because I've given you a separate copy. So in your bundle, it is page 52. Yeah, yeah, that's right, yeah. Okay, Simon.
Yeah, thank you. So, just to talk about the way the charts are laid out. So, in the first chart we have there is by year per 100,000 population. What we do is we take that figure, we divide it by the population and times it by 100,000. We do that so we can compare it against national figures. So where we can try and compare against our family group 4 and obviously the national picture. Family group 4 are a performance benchmark group that was set up from the previous national framework, not the current one, although it's being reviewed. That was based around performance groups, like-for-like fire services. So our family group 4 is made up of 18 other fire and rescue services. Included in that are fire services like Kent, Essex, Lancashire, so similar demographics, similar risk profiles. So that's how we collate the data from there. We take those data sets from national data sets. So in this example from fire casualties, the data is taken from the Home Office fire statistics to ensure that there's consistency in reporting. And then if you look at the 2016-17 line, this is taken from our provisional data, so this is looking at our own internal data sets. When the data sets are published, which will be around August, September time, we'll put the data in from the fire statistics monitor, and then we can show the comparisons then as well. The chart below that is by month, so this looks at the previous 12 months, in this case April 16 to March 17. The black line going through the middle is the 12-month rolling average. So each month that's calculated based on the previous average, monthly average over the previous 12 months. We use that to show the overall trend, and the arrow on the end sort of indicates the direction of travel over the period of time. The blue line is the actual, so if you're looking on the coloured version, so that's the actual monthly totals that have, or number of incidents that have happened in those months. Something that's quite new to us that we're looking at, we've implemented, is these control lines, these upper limit and the lower limit. And this is taken from a systems thinking approach. What we're looking for here is exceptions, so anything within a certain tolerance will be within those lines. Anything that goes above that red line, we are saying is a negative exception. And that's the sort of things we want to investigate further rather than investigating everything in our analysis. So when you get down to the performance commentary, the commentary gives a general performance update around the figures and looks at the national and the annual performance as well as the monthly performance. But under the actions, we actually try and look specifically at those exceptions, so where the incidents on the actual have gone over that upper limit, and that's the area of focus on these measures.
So, any questions?
Chairman, I think that if one goes back to the incident summary on page 48, is that it's very interesting if one looks at that the number of co-responding calls that we've actually dealt with, and probably the number of lives that have been saved in relationship to all the total number of fire calls. And in actual fact, in 2015-16, is that of the total calls, nearly 50% were co-responding, and that includes all the false alarms and everything else as well. So I think it's a very interesting work that we and our firefighters have taken on in dealing with co-responding, and I am convinced that they are saving more lives in co-responding than in dealing with any of the other activities which they are actually involved in. And I think we should thank our firefighters for taking it on, because we know that some services, they don't particularly want to do it, and so we should compliment them in doing so. Unfortunately, our co-responding seems to have dropped off in 16-17, but I suspect that's where the NHS didn't want to use us so much as they did in the previous year.
It's covered in the report.
Yeah, yeah, but it's good.
Yeah, thank you. And as a helpful observation, thank you. And we'll make sure that's passed on to the teams who remain very dedicated to the medical response, working with our partners in the South Central Ambulance Service. There's a couple of things which are covered in the report around why some of those things have dropped off, some of the demand's dropped off, and some of that's to do with policy change from the ambulance service. And some of their own availability in places has dropped off, which we're working very hard at. But members may remember also, I want to make the point that whilst it is a large chunk of our response, it is not included in the critical response speeds still, and we want to keep that separate at this time, because you'll recall during the risk review we wanted to have a fair and clear measurement of what different sized vehicles are made to our response speeds in the coming years. So we will, in time, probably add that to our critical response, because it is a critical response, but I think it's important just during this time we keep those things separate.
On Appendix B, we've got a summary overview of where we are against some of our service plan activities, what we've progressed with this past financial year. Just to note on this one, in October at your next meeting, we'll be bringing a more comprehensive update that will be a mid-term review, which takes us from the 2015 when we started the plan. We're now 2.5 years in, halfway through. Service management team have spent some time refreshing and looking forward, but we're taking that opportunity to say, right, this is where we are. So in October you'll get a far more comprehensive update on that, the progress report. Any questions?
Just in terms of what Nikki has rightly said, in terms of the October report, I've said to you before that we have a service plan which is agreed with you and was agreed from between 2015 and 2020. As Nikki has rightly said, halfway through 2017, clearly it's the halfway point. It also times, I think, with my own leaving of the service at the end of the year, and I feel a responsibility to update you fully as to the progress on that plan before I leave the service. And then it is my intention, having worked with the senior team, to offer the new chief officer, as they come into post, a draft refreshed plan for that second half period. And then the chief officer will obviously decide in the new year whether he or she wants to reform that plan or bring it forward to you. I think it's proper that I report on where we are on that plan and then offer to the new Chief Fire Officer a draft and a suggested refresh, not a rewrite, but a refresh of that 2015-20 plan. And then it's for that individual's consideration of how they take that forward with yourself as the authority. So that's the reason for the full review in October.
Good. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Can I just ask a very quick question about the falls call out? Being called out for falls where there is no suspected injury.
Yep.
Do we have numbers or
What was left the room?
for that, or how frequently that occurs, or has it stalled?
So this would best be answered by Rob, so I'll put that caveat in from the beginning.
Yeah.
It's still operating in one area, so Wickham, we're still getting very low numbers, so there isn't much to report in that respect yet. We're still working with other areas to roll that out further, and we'll make sure we give you a full report at the next opportunity.
If I may, I have said this before, and I will continue to say it to the time I leave. The green calls, the falls, the slips and trips and injuries, is I truly believe the space that the fire service should be moving into. The fact that ambulances with paramedics are tied up on vulnerable people falling today, who through a good questioning online are not injured significantly. I do believe the fire service has a real capability to provide support to those individuals and would take pressure off our ambulance colleagues. And therefore, I'm very encouraged that we are one of the first fire services in the country to operate this pilot at Wickham. We're keen to see that progress, and I'm sure that the evaluation of that pilot will see us significantly contributing to the community of Wickham, and I personally would like to see that through the evaluation being spread to other areas of the county, and I think we will be leading fire services across the country in that regard. Thank you, Chairman.
I think Ridian was first, wasn't he? Yeah, Ridian.
Chairman, can I ask David, what is the percentage of women firefighters?
The percentage of women firefighters at the moment is 4.5%. We average about the same as across the country. It isn't, I read into your question that, and certainly my own reflection is that it isn't sufficient. We should be more reflective of the community. I've said in the past that 51% of the population of Hampshire are women, and therefore if we confine ourselves to only recruiting 4.5% of that population, then we don't get the best from our community to provide the service that we provide. Our recruits graduation, which you are invited to next week, only sees 1 of 27 being women. We do put in place positive action, which encourages women in our community to see the fire service as a career for them. But I would give you an assurance, the authority, that although we do provide that positive action and encourage women to come forward, which is to what is now going to be an annual recruitment process, and we'd encourage women to come forward to seek a career in the fire service. When we come to the actual selection process, I describe it as 110 metres hurdles, and the hurdles for any candidate that starts on that starting line is of equal height, and we will always, through that process, take the best candidates for our service. I'd just like to see a much more equitable line-up on the starting line from men, women, black and ethnic minority from our community, and I'd encourage if people are watching this or hearing from the authority to think about a career in the fire service. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. We know it's going to be a pertinent part of the inspection that's coming in due course.
Well, and thank you. I was just looking for the assurance that the bar won't be dropped.
Yeah, it's a question about something on page 69 of the document pack, about communications and engagement. You're updating the regional MPs and other key partners and stakeholders. Now, I know that when there is a major incident in Southampton, one of our cabinet members is kept in the loop. Does that happen in the other authorities in the county?
Which page are you on?
Page 69.
Yeah, so to answer your question directly, yes, it's always our intention that the challenge with any unusual event, let's take the Grenfell Tower crisis of late, the rising tide, I'd call it, issue around in Hampshire, where people are getting concerned about their own residency. They were getting calls to local authorities were getting concerned about what do they need to do, those sorts of events. Clearly the stakeholders change very quickly depending on the event you have. But certainly MPs, members around this table will certainly be aware of us notifying you. We try and let chief execs know and council officers know where things arrive. But the challenge for our team, on-duty team actually, over the weekends and those sorts of things, is to consider who the stakeholders are and make sure we're engaging with them, because often they help us to resolve these issues in the first instance, as well as just out of politeness let them know what's going on. They're key to actually resolving the issues, particularly if we're trying to reassure our community. The role of local authorities, the role of local councillors, the role of others is key in that regard. And to extend that further, the Local Resilience Forum is going to be doing some work further with elected members in all of our constituent authorities to work through the roles of elected members during crisis, so we can be clear about what's expected, with your indulgence, of course, so that people can understand their roles in those events. So perhaps to answer your question around engagement during either crisis or in peacetime, indeed, we're adamant that we'll do more of it. The question is that we don't overdo the case, but make sure you know how to contact us and people know how they might be contacted during times of need.
Just to add to that, Ian Holt, the County Council's Emergency Planning Officer, is in weekly contact with all the chief executives of all the authorities across the whole of Hampshire.
Thank you. Well, firstly, I can't resist pointing out that the NHS, across the NHS as a whole, 77% of its workforce is female, and in many trusts and job functions, it's a much, much higher number than that. And I have yet to hear anybody say that more action must be taken to employ more men. Not once have I ever heard that. On the business plan and related matters, there's been an alarming increase in the number of false alarms. A little surprising, really. It's the sort of thing I would expect to gradually go down as these things become, maybe only slowly, but as these things become more advanced. And so the number of false alarms in comparison to the number of fires is about 2 to 1, I suppose. There's also a big increase in the number of special service calls, which I believe are mostly trapped in the lift. And so, this is obviously having an effect on our capacity to deal with actual incidents. These are things which really you would hope that property owners could do something to reduce the numbers on. And while I see the commentary in there about what has happened, I'm not quite sure why it has happened and what we can realistically hope to do about it. Or is it just a blip?
Thank you, Chairman. So, in terms of the statistic, of course, they vary and fluctuate significantly, depending on many different factors. In terms of the false alarms, what we're looking into at the moment is that partly as a result of more systems, as more businesses fit false alarms, you'd expect a higher percentage of those. So we are currently looking into that. We have a very active regime of investigating false alarms, particularly repeat offenders, and over the last few years have done significant work with some of our highest false alarm repeat offenders, for want of a better term. Some of those have been hospitals, actually, obviously because of the nature of the occupancy and the sheer size and scale of them, and have significantly reduced those repeat offenders in terms of false alarms. So what we're seeing is an increase of one-off false alarms across more systems, we believe, but we are currently looking into that and we'll continue to work to reduce those. In terms of the special service calls, they fluctuate for a number of different reasons. In some cases, it's assistance to other services, particularly the ambulance service, which will be a deliberate choice on our part. So it's about breaking in and effecting entry on behalf of ambulance service, for which actually we see an increase as a positive. So they aren't getting in the way of our traditional calls. They are, in fact, effectively part of our traditional call. We're going to a vulnerable person, and so some of that is a deliberate change of policy on our part. But they will always fluctuate up and down, and we look into every change to look for that explanation.
Just to add to Andy's comments, in terms of false alarms, we're seeing an increase across our whole family group as well. So as Sam is actually chair of family group, I'm sure that will be a conversation for the next meeting they have, when they sit down and look at these trends across the board as well. So that can add to some of our knowledge.
Oh, sorry, I keep forgetting to turn on. Sorry, beg your pardon. So can I take you to the recommendation on page 44 of your agenda, that we review the performance detailed in appendices A and B and note the strategies for improvement. And we will be receiving a further report in due course. So you're all content with that recommendation? Good. Thank you very much. We now move to item 10, page 75, please, the Health and Safety Annual Report. If you turn to page 75. Who is giving us this report? Is this Neil? It's Neil, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, pleased to bring this annual report on health and safety, and to remind you, in fact, it's in a diagram, useful diagram in the paper about our responsibilities, including your own as the Thorough Authority for Health and Safety. So the diagram, I think, does that justice, explains the hierarchy of responsibility across health and safety. Clearly a legal requirement as well as a moral one. You'll also know that during risk review we were clear with your steerage around the safer firefighter, safer community and financial envelope kind of priority order. So our core purpose is to make sure our communities are safe, but in doing so we must make sure our firefighters and our teams are as protected as possible. So it's a key element of our future planning. So, and I'm ever so pleased to say, certainly over the last 2 years, we've seen some really positive steps forward in making our workplace a safer place. Never to oversight the dangers in which our firefighters and our teams face every day. But the idea of planning, doing, checking and acting is consistent across health and safety regimes in the various highest performing organisations. And I'm pleased to say that our robust approach to that over the last 2 years has created some more benefits. What we're trying to do is increase the number of times our teams culturally spot things that might cause incident or injury and report them. Because as we all know, reporting of these things is much more likely to lead to a safer work environment. So you'll note on the page 79, paragraph 27, there is a total recorded events column, which is actually up from 2015-16 to 187, but that includes near miss and cause for concern reports. So what we're trying to encourage is the increase of near miss and cause for concern reports. So these should be going up, and we'd encourage them to go up. And that should lead to a reduction in total injuries and total loss of time from the workplace. And you'll see on the numbers that is exactly what's happened. So we've gone from 114 total injuries in 2016 to 98 in 2017. At the same time, a corresponding increase in reports of near misses and cause for concern. So the strategy is actually working. The idea of people reporting and caring and looking for things in their workplaces which are likely to cause injury, and the organisation's response to those items is causing a reduction in actual injuries. So I'm delighted to see that. Long may that continue. We'll continue to drive that particular habit and culture within our organisation. Just to finish, the recommendation in there is that you endorse this particular report, but I'm happy to take questions following your reading of that report.
Can I just ask about para 19, the areas of focus? We've got 4 areas there mentioned, haven't we?
Page 77.
Page 77, yes. Areas of focus. Supporting United Kingdom Rescue Challenge, and supporting High Press and Lance. Prince Philip Barracks. We were going to go on a visit there, I think, weren't we? Or was there a visit? And has there been a visit? Sorry?
So there have been some, but we can certainly offer more out.
Well, I think that might be useful if we could do that. And then it says here, attendance at group managers' forums, incident debriefs, and other meetings. What does what does that mean? I mean, that's rather a generalisation there. So what does that mean?
No, thank you for the question, Chairman. So what we're trying to demonstrate in their areas of focus is this kind of cultural move. So going to some of those forum, because in organisations sometimes, it doesn't exist here, I would add, because of the work they've been doing, health and safety can be the responsibility of the health and safety team. In this organisation, health and safety is responsible for everybody. So they're, as a team of specialists, they'll work very hard with existing teams like group managers, incident debriefs and other places to make sure that health and safety is considered as part of the agenda. It's in the psyche of people day by day.
So, sorry to interrupt you, but health and safety should always be a standard item on agendas, shouldn't it? But people shouldn't be afraid to bring something forward. That's where you're the near miss and cause of concern. That's so good that is going up. Yes, interrupt you.
No, you make exactly the point I was going to make. So the increase of when you're measuring things, sometimes you have to be careful not to kind of set expectations about reducing certain items. I definitely want to see a reduction in injuries, but I want to see an increase in near-miss reporting. Now, in a way, longer term, you'd expect people not to find things which would cause injury around the workplace. But that's the next step of this. So in the first instance, is becoming aware, making sure in all conversations, all meetings, all debriefs where we're learning that we're considering health and safety in its very essence in that regard.
So I did go on a visit to Farnborough about 4 or 5 years ago, but I'm not sure whether that was Prince Philip Barracks or whether it was somewhere else up there. You may well have had something fairly recently that I couldn't go to, but I think members would welcome another opportunity there to have a. If that's something you can investigate. And
certainly, Chairman. Your previous visit was to Montgomery Lines, which was one of the previous sites, really usefully. We've had to move out of there, so we'll organise some more visits to Prince Philip Barracks for everyone, yes.
I think when event taking place there, so we can see what's happening. Thank.
If I may, Chairman, our service exercise this year is likely to be there. We're in the planning throes at the moment, so perhaps we can tie that together, because the large service exercise, the 20 appliance exercise you visited last year, it was split last year between the oil refinery and a naval ship. This year it's going to be at Prince Philip Barracks. So can I suggest that we make that the event that we show everyone around?
Good idea.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
You have a date already?
Sorry, no, I don't yet, but I'll get it out to you as soon as I can.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Mr. Chairman, under health and safety, is that I know when, unfortunately, we lost 2 firefighters in Southampton, is that one of the things that came out of it was the BA and wires and what have you, and somebody within the service, one of the firefighters, found a way of putting a strap across, and I can't remember exactly what it was, a way to stop wires getting tangled up within the BA system. Now, firefighting or the fire and rescue service up and down the country, all of the services will have certain things which will happen in doing something. How is that fed through the service so that each service can pick up on that and therefore try to reduce its accidents and what have you within its own service? Is there a central point where things suddenly happen you can feed into and gain information back from others?
Well, I think there is, because that change that was invented here by one of our firefighters has gone outside the fire service. I think, if I'm right, it's gone to the Royal Navy, I believe. So, yes, I'm sure Neil or Andy can comment further.
Yeah, so if I may, so that particular adaptation after Shirley Towers was distributed around all UK fire and rescue services and indeed much wider. At the time, that process, it's fair to say, was slightly ad hoc. What has happened in the last few years, we have all begun to collaborate around national operational guidance. You'll have seen many examples of that being produced. The National Operational Guidance Team, funded by every fire and rescue service based in London Fire Brigade headquarters, have recently developed a national operational learning platform that is designed to do exactly as you described, to take learning from incidents, whether that's practical around equipment, whether it's about procedures, whether it's about the guidance itself, to analyse that learning and then to disseminate it to every fire and rescue service. That process is still being formed. There are 8 fire and rescue services across the UK who are in a pilot of that process. I'm pleased to say we are one, and therefore we are actively designing and engineering a simple reporting system that feeds in something like that as an example. We had this issue, these is our outcomes, and that will feed in, it will be assessed against existing guidance or existing equipment, and that lesson will be then disseminated across all fire and rescue services in the UK. So that process is still being developed, but I'm pleased to say is there, and we are actively taking part in it.
So just quickly following on from that, you're talking about design. Do we have any contact with the university?
Chairman, we work with certainly all the universities within Hampshire, predominantly Portsmouth, Southampton and Southampton Solent universities, in terms of engineering, particularly around investigation and things like that. We have some really good contacts. There is also, perhaps I should have mentioned, the Chief Fire Officers Association, National Fire Chiefs Council have recently set up a research and development hub. We have seconded an officer to that research and development hub. Jeff is heavily involved with that piece of work so that we, the UK Fire and Rescue Service, are pooling information, sharing lessons. We're not all researching the same bit of kit over and over separately. So that's another development, still growing, still evolving, but again, which we are actively involved in.
Any more comments? No? Right. Okay, thank you for that, members. So can I take you to the recommendation there, which is on page 81 of your pack, that the annual health and safety report here presented be endorsed by the Hampshire Fire and Rescue Authority. You're content with that recommendation? Thank you very much. Right, we now move on to item 11 then, page, what page is it? Page 83, Community Safety Partnerships. I think this is you again, Neil, please, yes.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Members may recall a conversation last authority meeting about the nomination of members to the CSPs. Just a quick reminder, the Crime and Disorder Act 1998 established community safety partnerships, and they replaced the CDRPs, Crime Reduction Partnerships. Now, it is about being statutory partners with the police and others to reduce crime in our area. So we are a statutory body, and we are required to assist in that regard. Now, there are a number of ways in which we can assist and have done up until this point. Firstly, to reassure you, and it's an appendix in this paper, that group managers in the areas do attend CSPs regularly. They're active members and form a role on your behalf there already. The question this paper asks you to consider is whether you want to consider different ways of doing that. So there were three choices in the options to ensure. I even call it. I thought so. Three options to consider: whether we want to leave officers attending on your behalf alone, but also make sure that one of your a member is represented the authority at the strategic group, which is held probably twice a year. So that oversights all of the CSPs across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, and that could be represented by one member of the authority. Whether we want to have members attend each of the 11 CSPs, which will be quite a challenge in trying to divvy that up, and that's the challenge we had last time, or whether we attend the CSPs which are, by definition, perhaps higher risk or higher identifiable area, so you may want to attend those and represent Hampshire Fire and Rescue Authority at those meetings. As I understand it, none of the CSPs would be adverse to having Fire Authority members there. They're all welcoming people to come along and make a difference. But I'm sure to make sure as an authority we consider this to using your time effectively and you to be satisfied that you are ably represented as an authority at these CSPs. So the recommendation that we've made in order to save you time, but obviously you'll need to have a conversation about this, is option B, which is requiring one of your number to attend the strategic group twice a year, and that you nominate group commanders to attend the CSP, 11 CSPs across Hampshire and Isle of Wight, to ensure that you're represented legally in those events. Happy to take questions.
I have discussed this with Neil, and obviously the recommendation is set before you. I do think there's a slight addition, if I may, and that is if a group manager representing on your behalf sees an agenda which they feel that a local authority a fire authority member should be there, then clearly we can instruct the group manager to flag that to one of you to represent the authority. So that it's not you're completely cut out CSPs. If the group manager sees the opportunity and feels it's necessary, then we can flag that to you. Maybe a helpful suggestion.
What we haven't got is the timeline for these meetings, though, have we? Have we got it here? We don't know how often they occur.
We don't have the timings of the individual meetings.
No, that would be useful to know.
Yeah, can I just say, my understanding of this was that it was to be, as you said, Dave, that if the group manager felt he wanted a member of the authority there, the member of the authority would go. I would also take it one further, that if an authority member feels the need to go along to their local area, that they should feel free to do so. Yeah.
Certainly, I've been a member of Fair and One for some years now, and I would certainly like to continue, because I think there is benefit from being involved and hearing what actually is going on. So I think that where members want to be particularly involved, as Liz has just said, I think they should be able to continue or be able to go to them.
Of course, Sharon, I would remind the authority that the challenge they got is there's a whole bit of Hampshire not covered by people in this room. So there were lots of CSPs operating without you, and they're not your areas. So I guess the statutory responsibility is covered, because that's the point of the recommendation, that you're appointing group managers to go on your behalf. And I think the point has been well made that if you should want to go to your local CSP, we'll make sure you're aware of the dates of those, and your group commander will invite you to attend. We just have to be sensitive about on behalf of the Fire Authority, because some areas, as I said earlier, they're not covered by the Fire Authority, so they'll never have anybody, a member from the Fire Authority attending.
Yeah, I would say, Neil, that if there is an area you feel is not represented by a member of the Fire Authority, but there is an issue that needs a member of the Fire Authority to be there, that actually is brought back to us and we delegate someone to go to that meeting rather than leave a vacant seat. Yeah?
Sharon. Oh, Sharon.
Yes, I've, for the last sort of couple of years, nobody has gone along to the Southampton CSP, member of the Fire Authority. When I had a conversation with the cabinet member under whose portfolio it falls, she wasn't aware that, the Fire Authority did appoint a member. I mean, the group manager goes along, she knows that, but she wasn't aware that there was actually a member to go along.
So you can go in future then?
Yes, but is there a mechanism for letting them know, sort of for any other member to go along?
Maybe if you agree the proposal this morning, this afternoon, in relation to the group managers being your nominated representatives at those meetings, and then there is behind that the option for you to attend both on the agenda or by your own personal preference. Yes. That subtle change of relationship we can then indicate through a letter to all of the chairs of the CSPs, and by that they will be informed of the potential that a Fire Authority, a member, may attend on certain occasions. Thank you, Chairman.
Good, thank you. Right, are you all content with the recommendation, which is that we support option B? Agree?
I'm not content as it's written, because I think we've actually generally changed it in a sense that anybody who wants to go can continue to go, and also is that if a group manager wants somebody to go, he can actually ask for them to go. And I don't think this motion...
It doesn't say that.
It's not worded in that same way. But I think that I agree with what we've all said and agreed, but not the wording that's here.
Well, that can be added. I mean, we can say, Kevin, can you just amend that to say members will continue to be involved as appropriate, or some sorry? Invited, yes, yeah, we can add to that. Yeah. Okay.
Then I agree.
With that addition, you're content with that?
Yeah.
With that.
Okay, good, thank you. Now, we come to page 89, agenda item 12.
Jenny has joined us.
Oh, Jenny, yes, hello. Welcome. Chief Officer Recruitment. This is a report of the chairman of the working group. Is the chairman of the working group going to present her report? And invite Jenny to add to it?
Absolutely. I think it's all here, it's quite clear. The working group met and set up the way forward for the recruitment of the working group, of the new chief officer. This working group, pending today, has set out a series of recommendations on page 92 for all members to consider. I think basically we're going to set up another working group to actually run joint committee, including a member from the Isle of Wight. I'm happy to take questions. I'm happy to ask Jenny to further go into it.
Excuse me, I'm a bit hoarse. So I think the paper outlines the conversation we had as a working group. Some of you were in the room at the time. There were some key considerations that we needed to work through in terms of what is it that the authority is looking for from this reappointment process, which this paper documents. So this is the basis upon which we would be going out to the market to recruit Dave's successor. And the second really important piece is that joint committee consisting of members of the Fire Authority in Hampshire and also a single member from the Isle of Wight, that the responsibility for the design and the implementation and the decision around the appointment to the Chief Fire Officer role is totally delegated to the group. So that's the essence of the recommendation in here, what we're looking for and how we intend to handle the process.
May, just to add a slight detail, it did go through full council on the Isle of Wight, didn't it? So agreement was formed through full council of the Isle of Wight to form the joint committee, which this paper then proposes. So it has the support of the Isle of Wight Council.
And we also received the minutes at the county council as well.
Yes.
Yes. Questions, members, comments? No. Jenny, are you able to give us any indication of date, timeline? That would be helpful.
Yes, definitely. So we said we would set up everything in order to be able to kick something off immediately after a decision today, if you were happy to endorse the recommendations in here. We've done that. I think it's really important that I sit down with the chair of that joint committee to make sure that things like the advertisement and the details of where we're going to advertise are jointly agreed. So those things are in the diary. The plan would be that as soon as we've had those conversations, we'd put the advert out all the way through the summer. So it's for a period of sort of 5 to 6 weeks that it's open, with a view then to doing a shortlisting in very early September, to conducting an assessment process in the middle of September, which ought to be able to help us make the appointment process. Gives those that are wishing to apply plenty of time during the summer to get their application together even if they are away for several weeks during that period. But also tries to bring the date forward by which we're making an offer to someone, in order that if there are long notice periods that need to be considered by a successful candidate, that we're able to try and consolidate or compress the gap between Dave leaving and your successor joining, and keeping that as tight as possible.
It's just occurred to me that
Can I just say to that, Councillor Glynn, actually members who are not members of the working group will probably be invited to be on one of the stakeholder panels when the applicants or the shortlisted applicants give presentations, and we would expect those members who come to those sessions to give the working group feedback on what they feel about the applicants.
what you're
I think you were raising a different issue there, about whether there's going to be a quorum of working group people during August.
quorums. I don't think you actually have a quorum, but it's about having.
Well, whether there's enough members, I
Whether
think.
you've got enough members.
Yes, I think that's
Kevin
what.
wants to say something.
Yeah.
Chairman, perhaps it would help if I could clarify that this is about the establishment of a joint committee with the Isle of Wight for the process of the recruitment of a new chief officer. The membership of this doesn't need to be the same as the working group that existed before, but as a joint committee it would need to follow standard committee procedures in terms of quorum. The membership would need to be defined, and I think one of the recommendations is to make appointments to it today.
And I think just so that we're not using language that we then don't realise how it's being used interchangeably, therefore that joint committee is likely therefore to be the formal panel that interviews and undertakes the most formal part of the assessment and can therefore make the decision about the appointment. But then during that process, we've talked in the paper about a range of stakeholder engagement that provides the panel with a wider perspective of things to consider. And one of those would be a broader member stakeholder group that a number of people could participate in.
Thank you.
Plus the.
The quorum will be three. Quorum will be three.
Is the quorum mentioned in the paper? Because I didn't.
Was suggested that the joint committee from HFRA should comprise of Councillor Carter as the chairman, Sharon, Roger, Luke and myself. I think that was what was agreed.
And then everybody else is part of one of the stakeholder groups.
Yes.
So I'm keen that everybody should contribute to this. What are we calling it?
Joint committee.
Joint committee.
Can I propose that they're the members of HFRA who become members of the joint committee? Can I ask for a vote of agreement from members? Agree?
All in favour, basically.
All right, yes, all in favour. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there anything else from this paper that we need to discuss, Jenny? Sorry.
That's why you're sat on a table on your own.
Sorry. Have we covered everything that we need to? We have. Good, okay. Thank you.
Sorry. Page 92.
Can I take you then to page 92, please, where you've got recommendations there. And you're asked to note the outcome of the members' working group, consideration of the report of the head of HR agrees the recommendations of the member working group set out in Appendix 2. And then you've got other recommendations set out below there. Are you all content with those recommendations? Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Right. Well, that concludes our meeting. It's been a very productive meeting this morning, so thank you all for your contributions. I've nothing else to add to the meeting today other than just remind you all that our next meeting is on the 4th of October, and then after that there will be the meeting will be on the 5th of December. There will be CMT meetings taking place. I think you have the dates of those, and you are all invited to attend those meetings if you wish to.
When's the next CMT?
CMT is fairly soon, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, next month. Yes.
It is, yes.
Yes. Good. Right. So thank you again, all of you, for your attendance. That concludes the meeting. Thank you.